So The Nun is not great. The Nun is the origin story of Valak the Demon from The Conjuring 2. This movie mostly exists because Valak was a memorable design for a demon and The Conjuring 2 was successful. Honestly, I don't know if people were clamoring to see more or know more about Valak, but honestly, I can't really fault the studio for wanting to take advantage of the hype, considering how successful the rest of their ConjuringVerse movies had been so far. Unfortunately, the resulting movie doesn't quite live up to the quality of the mainline movies and feels more like it was just thrown together at the last minute. I don't hate this movie the way some people do. A lot of it is pretty rough, but I think there's some decent ideas in here after watching it 4 times, and so I just want to give everything a fair shake. So let's get into it.
This evil needs a vessel to escape.
I did not understand a word you just said.
Set in 1952, Father Burke and Sister Irene travel to a castle in Romania where a nun has committed suicide. The Vatican has asked that they figure out what's going on and determine whether or not the place is still holy. They are accompanied by a French-Canadian delivery boy, Frenchy, who discovered the body. During their visit, they are haunted multiple times and learn from the nuns there that there is a demon being kept at bay that was summoned long ago, but over the last decade or so has been growing stronger. Eventually they realize the nuns were only visions of Irene's and that the nuns are already dead. They decide to reseal the gateway and succeed in doing that, but not before Valak is able to possess Frenchy, which allows Valak to appear in The Conjuring 2. The end.
You failed.
This movie comes in at around 90 minutes, including credits. Barely fills that time. Most of the movie is like scare sequences that do nothing to move the story forward. Instead, kind of just feel like either a director wanting to flex and show you what kind of sequences they can come up with, which I guess more likely is that it's if you don't have scare sequences to keep the energy up, people will get bored and therefore they won't like the movie because they like a bad movie if it's full of jump scares, right? There's a lot wrong scene by scene, but I'm not going to waste my time going through scene by scene. Just know that pretty much every element of the story has something confusing and underwritten about it. What I do like about this story, though, is that it's tied directly into religion and the church through the character of Irene. And obviously I like that because the demon is taking the form of a nun, so it's appropriate that it does that. However, and I'll get more into this later, it only barely scratches the surface of what it could explore in my opinion. I just read out the entire plot of the movie and that was what, like a few sentences? The setup doesn't give the movie enough to work with and so the 90 minutes feel like a total slog. The whole point of this prequel was to give you an origin of Valak, but the whole origin is just kind of a guy summoned it, and to be fair, that's what happens with demons. But I think the better origin for this character would have been more, yes, obviously you just summon a demon, but why does it take the form of a nun? And thus tying this story more appropriately into Irene's character and religion and faith. And obviously there are a lot of movies that are about demons that are good, so obviously it's not impossible to do this. They just didn't. And obviously the best way to make an interesting story is to have interesting characters. Insert joke about the nun having nun characters.
I love you, Jesus.
Irene is a nun in training who teaches at a school and hasn't taken her vows yet. Right away she's shown to be sweet, curious, empathetic. Essentially she's Lorraine, but with less depth. Irene is the best character in the movie though because her story actually connects to the villain, or can be connected to the villain. At the beginning, Irene tells the children in her class that just because something isn't in the Bible doesn't mean it's not true, and gives the example of penguins. In terms of plot, I have to assume this is meant to tie into her abilities, since those abilities aren't brought up in the Bible as far as I know. Don't quote me, I have not read the Bible.
Evil.
But character-wise, it shows that she's at odds with how the church institution teaches. This is emphasized by a nun entering and clearly being bothered by her, so the conclusion that I take away from that is that Irene doesn't quite fit in here. She doesn't fully subscribe to what they teach and believe. When it's revealed that she hasn't taken her vows yet, and the conversation with Frenchy makes it clear that it's because she has reservations, you're kind of like, okay, so I could see how a demon in the form of a nun could embody her fears because the whole thing she's afraid of is becoming a nun. Thus, the demon being in the form of a nun you get it. And obviously I'm projecting a little because Irene doesn't ever actually explain where her hesitations come from. It's more just implied. There's a shot in the chapel near the beginning that I liked that I thought reflected this really well. I'm pretty sure this was actually just meant to be a like, oh, Valak is evil and is anti-Jesus, but I think it also works really well to reflect how the institution gets in the way of her relationship with God. Once she gets to the castle, Valak and the other nuns comment on her not taking her vows yet, and one of the nuns says she should leave because of this. It's never clear why this is such a big deal. At first I thought it was meant to suggest that she's an easier target for possession because of this, but she's later possessed even after taking her vows, and that moment when she takes her vows is viewed as the culmination of her arc. So I don't really know what that's about. She reveals to Burke that as a girl she had visions that were always different but always ended with the thought Mary points the way. Oddly specific. The church became interested in her because of this and presumably took her in as a child, and that's again presumably why she's on the path to becoming a nun. But she also clearly has a strong relationship with her faith, so it seems like the problem is more, again, with the institution rather than her faith. I guess now is as good a time as any to talk about Irene's powers. Irene says that she had visions of random things when she was a girl, but we're never told what, just the thing about Mary pointing the way. I'm not sure if those are meant to be premonitions or they're just kind of like thematic visions. She's definitely able to communicate with the dead because she talks to the nuns throughout the movie who are revealed to be dead. She also seems to be able to use her powers to ignore illusions, I guess. Pretty sure this one's just a plot device, but I'm referring to the point where Burke is buried alive and he's ringing the grave bell. Irene hears it and comes down to the graveyard, but then Valak starts using its abilities to ring all of the grave bells, and she's able to pinpoint which one is Burke. Again, I don't really get what that is. It never comes back. So she has a dream when she's sleeping in the castle, but it doesn't mean anything except to remind us of Mary points the way, and I'm pretty sure that's all the powers. The weird thing about Irene's abilities is that in some ways I don't think they were actually necessary. Like, they're necessary to get her to the castle in the first place, but the whole plot could still work without it. Unless they were literally trying to just create a knockoff Lorraine. My big problem with Irene is just that I don't think they do anything with what they've set up. Valak is able to possess Irene even after she takes her vows, which makes me question why that whole element was considered important to the plot. The culmination of her arc is that she goes from being unsure about committing to being a nun to being committed to being a nun because her communication with the dead nuns has provided her with some information on how to defeat Valak, and she takes this as like, oh, this is confirmation that what I have is a gift from God, and I understand that. This is clearly evidence that her powers are a good thing, but I just don't see how that resolves her emotional conflict. It wasn't set up that she was an outsider with the church because of her abilities. In fact, they took interest in her and she went on this mission specifically because of her abilities. The problem is that we're never given a concrete reason why she's uneasy about becoming a nun, so it's almost impossible to understand why her mind changes by the end. It's not really clear what the intention was. This movie also has kind of a confusing perspective on the church that is also present a little bit in Burke's storyline, where like in the beginning of the movie it wants to be critical of the institution as an entity separate from faith, i.e. Irene believing in God and the Bible but having a contentious relationship with the faculty, but then it sort of wants to forget that it ever brought it up, like I said, with Irene's arc culminating in her being like, oh, my abilities are a gift, so I feel good about taking my vows now, but that doesn't really have anything to do with what your problem was in the beginning, so I don't see it. What I thought could have happened with Irene was something like she went through all of this, she took her vows thinking it would protect her from Valak, but Valak is still able to possess her, so she realizes like a title change doesn't mean anything. It's more about your faith and your personal relationship. Anyway, we don't get a real epilogue, so I have no idea what Irene ends up doing with her life or how she's changed by the end, so that sucks.
Bonjour, mademoiselle. Je proclame le soleil. Je veux m'en venger. Merci beaucoup.
Frenchy is a simple character. He traveled to Romania looking for gold, but decided to stay because he liked the people and wanted to help them in any way he could. Reads like a real hero complex. But he's also a self-proclaimed fuckboy and delivery boy, and just like onions, he's got layers. Frenchy is a weird character because while he mostly just fulfills your typical nice boy and potential love interest role, he also apparently has a history, like I said, of being a fuckboy, and then he also lives in this village where he knows all the people and supposedly has this care for them, but he isn't familiar with their traditions. Anyway, when you first meet Frenchy, he's singing in French, just so you know he's French. He's making a delivery to the castle where he discovers the body. He has nightmares about the experience, which yeah, he thinks Burke and Irene are a father and daughter or husband and wife that are mad at him when they show up at his house, but then they're like, no, we've never met, and he's like, ooh, maybe we should, and is convinced to take them to the castle because Irene is pretty and nice to him. They go and he flirts with Irene, telling her his backstory and calls out her resistance to becoming a nun. There isn't really any more characterization after this besides him being concerned for Irene and Burke's safety. He's haunted on his way back to the village by a nun hanging herself and then falling on him, which is then a zombie nun. He grabs a cross out of the ground and takes it with him, which I guess is a bit of nun humor. The next time we see Frenchy, he's back in the village bar, still with the cross, and everyone there is sad because one of the residents' children just died, and it's been a pattern as of late that horrible things are happening to these people, and they believe it's because of the castle. The weird part here is that Frenchy asks them why they're covering the mirror after this kid's death, but they literally bring up the fact that this has been going on for a long time, which makes me think that they've been covering the mirrors a lot. And if Frenchy's been here all this time, then how wouldn't he know? He even expresses that he's sad about this kid dying, and like he talks about her like he knew her. So what's the truth, Frenchy? To be honest, it's not a super huge plot hole because it doesn't change anything. It just kind of makes me think about how this script has a lot of little things here and there that give me the impression that they didn't have a lot of time to work everything out. What I do want to note here, though, not specific to Frenchy, but is how the village people are used here. I'm not saying they needed to go all out on making the village like its own character or anything, but I feel like there was a missed opportunity here to maybe have some commentary about how the affairs of the church affect the people. Considering the beginning of the film shows some animosity towards the church, it could have been interesting to carry that through to the effects of the situation on the people. But I digress. The end of this scene is where Frenchy sees the shotgun at the bar, which he takes with him to the finale and is basically just the nice guy again. There's a hint that Frenchy has more to his character when possessed Irene says, "You failed just like you failed everyone you've ever loved." But again, that's never been brought up at any point in the script. I can see where it might come from, like maybe an earlier draft had him explain that he left his original home because he failed his family or something. Like maybe that's the twist. Maybe that's why he presents like a fuckboy. He's trying to like play a role or something. It's not here, so again, I'm making stuff up. I brought it up before. Obviously he gets possessed sort of in the end, but what I'm confused about his choice to leave Romania. So from a franchise perspective, I get that it's to get him to where he needs to be for Conjuring 2, but from a character perspective, we've seen him multiple times express how he feels like he's a part of this community and how he wants to help them and he cares about them. But does that mean like after the evil is defeated he feels no more connection to them? It just seems weird that he would just up and leave with no hesitation when he's the one who said he feels like he belongs here. The one thing I will say about Frenchy is I think he's kind of a nice, lively presence. He's just weirdly inconsistent. What I really want to know though is if it is true that he's this huge homewrecker, I want to know how many people in this tiny village hate him.
There is only one thing worse than a rapist. Boom. A child. No.
Father Burke is a priest who is called upon by the church to investigate unusual events. He's shown to have kind of a rocky relationship with the church. Right at the beginning, the bishop brings up that he hasn't been to the Vatican in almost a decade, and he's suspicious that the bishops aren't telling him everything. When they tell him what they want him to do, he's like, I feel like you're not telling me something. And they're like, why? And he's like, because it's the Vatican. Personality-wise, he seems pretty pleasant. He's nice to both Irene and Frenchy, and it's not until he tells you his backstory that you really get any major impression of him. So the backstory. He tells Irene that during the war he was called to investigate this boy, Daniel, who was having visions. He made the determination that he was possessed and proceeded with exorcising. Daniel died because of injuries sustained during the exorcism. That's what Burke says. And now Burke feels guilty that he might have been too hasty with his determination, and that's what got Daniel killed. I like having a character with inner conflict. You know, that's always good. But Burke's feelings make no sense. So we're shown in the flashback footage of Daniel. He's tied up in the barn, and Burke reacts horrified to that, which is understandable. This is a child. But then Daniel starts literally growling like a demon. And when Burke starts yelling exorcism things at him, things start flying around everywhere. Daniel's eyes are glowing yellow, and he's reacting to all of this like a demon is being expelled from him. So for Burke to witness that and be like, maybe he wasn't possessed, doesn't make any fucking sense. What his inner conflict should have been was, damn, I expelled this demon, which is good, but this child is now dead. How do I reconcile that? And that's interesting and understandable because, yeah, of course it's like traumatic to be partially responsible for the death of this child. I just think it's weird that he would be like, oh, maybe he wasn't possessed? Like, maybe that's not what they were trying to get across, but that's how it comes across. Following this explanation of the backstory, Valak appears to him as Daniel, of course, and lures him into being buried alive, which admittedly, I can see the connection between Burke feeling like he ended someone's life early, like he sent Daniel to an early grave, and Burke being buried alive, dying before his time, being sent to an early grave. It makes sense. I see where they were going with that. But outside of that, this scene is mostly just to get Burke to find books on Valak, which also doesn't go anywhere. It doesn't help him understand how to defeat Valak. So I guess it was just to remind us who Valak is and to show him a picture of a snake, which I guess Valak is associated with, which explains why Valak haunts him as a snake as well. But otherwise, he's not at all responsible for defeating Valak in the end. He doesn't contribute anything to the plot. He doesn't have an arc. He doesn't fulfill anyone else's arc. So my question is, why didn't he just die here? I mean, he also could have just not been in the movie in the first place, and that could have been a good way to raise the stakes. Like, already on the first night that they're there, somebody dies. After this, he's haunted by Valak, who's pretending to be the Reverend Mother. He falls for obvious jump scares multiple times without even missing a beat. His scares also get lazier, like one is just a zombie hand grabbing him and breaking off. Another is him seeing a grave bell being dragged across the floor, and even after, this is literally after he just got jump scared by Valak, he sees this bell being dragged across the floor, and he's like, and follows it and gets jump scared by an ice zombie? Yeah, that one makes no sense. He's kind of useless. He doesn't learn any useful information. He needs Frenchy to save him. He gets stabbed in the leg. His cross catches fire when he tries to use it, and he's saved again by Frenchy. He gets bit in the eye by a snake. He gets thrown across the room when he tries to help Irene. He's useless. I don't want it to seem like I hate Burke. I don't hate Burke, but he is so irrelevant to the plot. I just don't understand why he's here. Like with Irene's conflict too, his conflict with his role in the church is never explored or resolved, and his characterization is just really bland. Like, I kind of figured he'd be maybe the more, like in personality, the more gruff character who would offset Irene, but no, he's basically interchangeable with Frenchy by the end, just without the romantic interest. I don't get why he's even in the movie other than to get Irene to the castle in the first place. I guess it's maybe just to have more people to jump scare, but you could have just jump scared Irene more times. Like, it's fine. That all being said, he's still a better character than the demon, who does exactly what all demons in movies do. Nothing.
Your name gives me dominion over you, demon!
No.
So last and least, we have the star of the show, Valak. I don't actually have that much to say about Valak at the end of the day. It really just suffers from your typical generic demon problems, where the power levels are all over the place, and the decision making makes no sense. So Valak is summoned in the Dark Ages by some guy in this castle, but the church seizes the castle and stops Valak from coming all the way through. They use the blood of Jesus Christ to seal the gateway, but I guess that's not enough, and they also take up constant, what do they call it? Constant adoration. They're just praying constantly. This apparently works until World War II, which I looked up when the Dark Ages are, and it was like 400 AD to 1000 AD at the very least for 950 years, because this movie takes place in 1952. Nothing serious enough happened to the castle to break the seal. It's only when in World War II the castle gets bombed that the seal is broken or slightly broken or whatever. It's not even entirely clear what actually opens the gateway again. It makes the most sense to me that the bombing interrupted the constant prayer, which created an opportunity for the seal to be broken, at least temporarily. That being said though, the movie never actually says this. All they say is evil found a new way to escape, which explains exactly nothing. I mean, literally the only other option is that the bombs created a hole in the seal that I guess literally leads to hell. Like if you took a drill and drilled in that spot, it would just be an endless tunnel down to hell and Valak could come out through it. I think that'd be kind of funny actually. So now as of 1940 something, Valak's power has been growing, which is another way of saying we can have this character sometimes be unable to do anything and sometimes be able to do everything depending on what we want, because we never defined what growing power actually entails. At the beginning of the movie is this sequence in which the suicide nun dies and she's given a key by this other nun who goes into the gateway room to... You know, I actually just watched this scene back and I don't know why she goes in there. The idea is that you would take Jesus' blood and drip it on the gateway to seal it. I guess they want that to be like a reveal later on, so she doesn't have the blood with her. What was the plan here, ma'am? Also during this part, because apparently she has time to say it, the first nun says,
Take it! This evil needs a vessel to escape. It will come after you next.
So are you trying to tell me that Valak saw this nun, that it literally kills? It has this nun that it's about to kill and thought, no, I don't feel like possessing her. Is Valak only interested in like young nuns? Like what? I know we need to get the movie going, but like why have this scene and establish that and raise the question? Why doesn't Valak just possess the first person that walks into the castle, or at least this room? And then throughout the whole movie, why doesn't Valak just possess any of them the second they walk in? Because literally, like at the beginning of the movie already, I don't know if Valak is able to roam around because they open that door. Though if that is the case, why would they open the door at all? And then either way, Valak has the ability to roam the whole castle. I thought maybe somewhere in the script at one point there was a beat where they reveal that Valak can't possess nuns or priests, and that's why Irene is a target, and in the end Frenchy. But they never established that, so why doesn't Valak just do that? Instead it spends all its time having fun jump scaring people. This movie literally says Valak wants to possess someone to leave the castle. So why does Valak waste time on anything else? Anyway, Valak haunts everyone, mostly preying on their fears, but also just appearing as random zombies sometimes, and eventually reveals that it's even immune to Burke's religious defenses. So essentially, actual religion is useless in the face of Valak. I'm not kidding. Burke tries multiple times to exorcise Valak, and Valak doesn't care at all. And the three times that Jesus Christ's blood is used to try and seal Valak away, it doesn't completely work. Of course, Valak does your typical demon shit where sometimes it'll alter all of reality, sometimes it'll just be illusions, sometimes it has telekinesis, and sometimes it'll just try and drown you, because why not drown a bitch? I know part of this is so you can have a movie, but like, man, just limit the abilities of your demon or something, because this is like, come on. In the end, Valak is defeated, but it turns out to sort of have possessed Frenchy, and it's revealed that Frenchy was the one in Amityville, and that's how Valak is connected to Ed and Lorraine, and that's how Valak can appear in The Conjuring 2. I said sort of possessed, so I've watched this movie 4 times now. Like I said, I still don't understand what's going on here. So Valak is able to like leave a piece of itself in someone else, which I guess can act as its consciousness, even if the rest of itself is sent back to hell, which is what happens at the end of this movie. 1, That's bonkers. I have to imagine that being drenched in the blood of Jesus, which allegedly properly seals the gateway again, would counteract any sort of countermeasure like this. And two, doesn't that mean that Valak could just keep doing the same thing infinitely and never die? Like, why wouldn't it do that in Conjuring 2? Maybe it did, and that'll be revealed in The Nun 2 or Conjuring 4. I consider it kind of universe breaking when your villain has a way to just exist perpetually no matter how many times it's sealed away. And now that I'm thinking about it, the ending doesn't even work anyway because they seal the gateway the exact same way it was sealed the first time, and even then they had to have nuns constantly praying to keep the gateway closed. But now that Irene does it, it's like, this ground is now holy. What? I also just wish Valak had more of a relationship with Irene. They're my OTP. It doesn't necessarily work with how the film is structured right now, but maybe if they had stuck with that idea of like holy people can't be possessed, then obviously that makes Irene more of a target because she hasn't committed herself to Jesus, like I said already. Valak falls into all the traps. They waste all their time messing with people when they could easily be fulfilling their goal, not really having anything to do with the characters except to be a thing they have to defeat, and I'm sorry, that's just really boring. So before I get into how I would try and improve The Nun, I want to just throw out some unrelated things I like and don't like. I like the creepy cross-filled hallway to the gateway room. It's eerie and claustrophobic and makes sense in universe, save for maybe like all the smoke everywhere, but it makes sense to me that the nuns would hang these crosses everywhere. I like the first shot of Valak we get coming down the hallway towards Sister Victoria as she's about to jump. Aesthetically, it's pleasing to my brain. I like Valak's theme or motif, like the musical cue. It's creepy and appropriately has that like church choir vibe. It feels like it carries a lot of weight. I like Irene's first interaction with the kids that she's teaching. I like that she's challenging them to think critically instead of blindly believing other people's opinions. I like that Frenchy calls out Irene's hesitation. It doesn't come back again, but it's a good start to have a character that could be a friend or love interest that actually challenges her to grow. I like the castle. I think old architecture like that has this cool lived-in feeling to it, though I wish they did a better job making me understand the geography because I can never understand how people get from one place to another, how far away it is. Like I said earlier, I like the idea of Burke being buried alive because he feels like he sent Daniel to an early grave, if that was their intention. And I like the shot of the nun's shadow overtaking the cross to represent Irene's insecurities about church and faith, again, if that was their intention. I like that in that giant foyer, I guess, kind of room where Burke spends most of his time, that chair in the middle of the room has the symbol of the snakes eating each other, and that's where you first see Valak posing as the Reverend Mother. Burke learns in that book that Valak is associated with snakes, so even though it's pretty obvious that that Reverend Mother is Valak, the symbol is still a kind of cool production design hint. I like that after Irene wakes up from her dream, she sees this nun rocking back and forth, and when she speaks to them, they stop and crack in place. I just thought that was cool. I also like that the cross on the wall turns upside down, but it's like in a wide shot, so they're not like, look, the cross is turning upside down. Valak is here. Obviously, this is a callback to earlier in the movie, and The Conjuring 2. Crosses are always turning upside down when Valak is near. I just wish it had been more of a consistent thing, like we saw that happen every time Valak entered a space. I like the first spiritual, I'll call it, reveal of Valak in the cross hallway with Irene when the door opens slowly and the theme plays and its face like emerges from the shadows. I think that should have been the actual first reveal, like the full reveal of Valak's face, because that was cool. I like the overhead shot of the nuns getting launched away from Irene when they're all praying towards the end of the movie. It's a little goofy, but it felt like it had like impact to me, so I liked it. I like the scene when Irene is face down on the ground taking her vows and Frenchie's cocking a shotgun during it. That part's kind of dumb, but in a vacuum, I like that. I think it's funny. Outside of scenes specifically, I like Valak's design, although I wish we didn't see it so clearly so often, and I like everyone's acting. Okay, alright. Stuff I don't like. I don't like that it's never explained why Valak wasn't able to possess anyone prior to the main character showing up. I already touched on that. It really is a big question mark looming over like the whole plot. I don't like how the movie awkwardly shoehorns in humor. It completely kills any sense of dread and creates a tone problem. Those moments aren't even funny. Like, is the movie meant to be actually scary, or is it meant to be like, Oh my god, we're being haunted by demons just like in a movie. Isn't that crazy? The earliest example of this that I remember is the comedic timing of the suicide nun's body breaking off of the noose when Frenchy finds it, which like leads into the title card. Like that was just a really weird moment. Like it's horrifying for him to find this, and then it like breaks off like it's a comedy beat. I don't like that nobody really feels like they have a complete arc. I touched on this too, but Burke and Frenchy especially never grow in any way. Like Burke doesn't reconcile his trauma over Daniel. Frenchy is never shown to be a coward, so him being heroic doesn't mean anything. I don't like that we see Valak fully so often. It really drains all the fear when you see the full image of the monster like every other scene. I don't like how after a while the scares for each character become less and less personal to them. Again, why does Burke see a zombie in ice? Where is that coming from? Lastly, I have mixed feelings about the literal blood of Jesus being used to seal gateways. It seems kind of insane for them to have Jesus's blood almost 2,000 years later and be able to use it for things like this. Not to mention the fact that it doesn't even completely fix the problem anytime it's used. So it seems weird and a bit too goofy to use in this context and just kind of useless. I mean, again, it didn't bother me compared to the other things, but I think it could have worked to just have used your typical rituals and stuff to just seal the gateway again. I don't know.
I thought this ground wasn't holy anymore.
It is now.
How would I improve the nun? So I alluded to this. I would lean way more into, in this case, Irene's struggle between her faith and relationship with God and her relationship to the church institution. This film already lays down some good groundwork for this, and I think it could have been smart to run with it. Irene is already mostly the main character, but I would make her the only main character. I think that would just focus it a lot more. Her introduction can be the same, and the situation at the castle can be mostly the same. Irene is not a full nun yet, and she's shown to question the rigid practices of the Catholic Church, which puts her at odds with other nuns. Valak's power is growing stronger, and the situation is growing more dire. The Vatican decides that it needs this situation resolved and makes the decision to move Irene to this castle in hopes that her abilities can resolve things. The Vatican will not inform her of their reasoning, just to keep in line with the original movie and maintain that sort of sketchiness of the church, and to drive home the whole theme. Irene feels unsure of her position because she knows that her abilities make her valuable, and it's possible that the church encouraged her to become a nun so they could continue to make use of her, maybe. Thus, she questions whether this is something she wants, becoming a nun, or if it's what she feels like she's supposed to do. I'm not exactly sure how I would play out the whole story, but I definitely think it's a good idea to limit Valak's abilities by not allowing it to possess people who have fully committed themselves to God. Essentially, the idea is kind of like they have no soul to take because they have given theirs to God. Whatever. Irene, though, is vulnerable because she has not fully committed herself to God because she's having this whole crisis. This is why Valak targets her, and this allows you to have your haunting without killing scenes with Irene. Valak wants to fully dissuade her from God or something. If you do want to include scenes where people are actually being killed, because this is a horror movie, you can have some actual alive nuns in the castle, maybe. Eventually, Irene would take her vows, but the motivation would be because she finds out Valak can't possess someone who has fully committed themselves, and she thinks that taking her vows will do this for her, but similar to the movie, this won't work, and Valak still pursues her, maybe can still possess her, I don't know. But the point is, she realizes that this is not the solution, because she's not doing it because she's actually committing herself to God, she's just doing it in like title change only. In the end, she can realize that the path of becoming a nun isn't for her, but that doesn't mean she's severing her connection with God. I obviously don't have this completely worked out, but I think that's kind of an interesting conclusion, because throughout the movie, you have these nuns who do have strong faith, and being a nun is the right path for them, but you will also allow for a character to have strong faith who doesn't operate within the church institution. I just think that's nicer. You have characters who are nuns and priests and all of this, and they are good and commit to the church, and then you also have ones like in the beginning who are not. And then you can also have people are fully committed to God and their faith and all of this stuff, but just because they are, it doesn't mean that they now have to like work for the church. Does that all make sense? I'm gonna say it makes sense. I hope so. I'm just trying to build on what the movie itself clearly has some feelings about, and I think that would be a not uninteresting way to go. You can't just bring these things up and do nothing with them. Also, again, the demon problem. To make things more manageable, we're going to remove the ability to literally alter reality. Why is this? I know it makes for cool sequences, but it's really world-breaking. Illusions are powerful enough and more thematically appropriate. Like, illusions are temptations, that's what demons do. So just when I first saw The Nun, I remember basically hating it. Like a lot of people, I thought it was just a very cheap feeling spin-off of a better project, and I'm not saying that's an invalid feeling, as I just expressed. I have a lot of problems with this movie. I think what you should do with any sort of art is try and find the positives in it. At least for me, it just leaves me with a better feeling than if I just sit here and go like, no, this movie sucks. Does doing this change the end product? No, I'm not saying ignore the actual quality of the movie, but like I said, I would rather feel like I was able to get something out of it than to be bitter about it. So The Nun is not a great movie, that's for sure, but I think with maybe more time, more focus, more something, it definitely could have been something.
I had a series of visions when I was younger. And after each one ended, the same thought would be stuck in my head.
What did you see?
Frenchy?